Hello and welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's episode, we visit the O'Connor farm. Kent Thiesse discusses why MFP payments will not solve cash flow issues, and we talk with U of M Extension educator Brad Carlson about the results of research done on variable rate nitrogen. All here today on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil, and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Southern Minnesota Center for Agriculture, promoting education and careers in agriculture, connecting students with college, curriculum, and industry resources to develop, fill, and sustain jobs with agriculture in our region.
Welcome to Farm Connections. We traveled to rural Blooming Prairie, Minnesota to visit with Jim O'Connor from the O'Connor Farms. Jim, welcome to Farm Connections and thanks for letting us come to your farm.
Well, Dan, welcome to the farm. And it's a nice rainy day. We need a little moisture to finish off our soybeans here, so good day.
Good day. And it's a nice fall day to be thinking about getting ready for harvest. So what's happening at your farm? Some people think that farmers really don't work all year long, and especially when it's raining, they go fishing. What's happening here?
Well, it's too rainy to go fishing, so we've got the combine in the shop, and tractor is here getting greased up, oil changed and checked over, and we're doing those advanced preparations, so when it is go time, we can go.
Well, what happens when go time happens? You have 10 acres, 20 acres, several thousand acres? What?
Our family farm is around 3,200 acres, about half corn, half soybeans. And you know, when it's time, when the soybeans are ready, we want to be ready.
Why is that important?
Well, the soybeans have to be harvested at an opportune moisture time. And when they're 13%, you want to be out there getting after them. You don't want to wait until they're 10%, because you're going to lose a fair amount of yield because of it.
When that pod gets too dry and the reel comes around and pulls it into the combine, they just explode, don't they?
They do, and that's heartbreaking to watch that. You put your heart and soul in putting the crop in the ground, and all summer long, you're taking care of it, and you're also worrying about it. And your goal is to bring that crop in. That's our job.
Well, losing 5-6 bushels an acre certainly would impact your return or your losses, maybe $50, $60 losses per acre if you don't get it in the combine.
Absolutely. We actually went to a draper head a few years ago for our soybean harvest, and that actually has helped us cuts and reduce some of those field losses.
So instead of the gathering auger, you've got canvases that bring it to the center?
Yes.
And up into the machine?
Yes, yes. They work great. That's the only way, basically, that, I really like that.
Well, you referenced you've watched that crop all year long and you've got a lot of money invested in it. What happens if we don't get the harvest in?
Well, then it kind of stems a series or chain of events that is undesirable for a farmer. If you don't get the crop in, then all the neighbors are wondering, what's wrong with that guy and why isn't he getting it done? The banker's also going to wonder, why didn't you get the crop in? So there's that accountability, and then your family members are going to be mad because, well, there's going to be no money there, and it's just a bad chain of events.
So family living comes from this harvest?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got the investment in the seed, the chemical, the fertilizer, the land, the equipment, everything's there, and it all is dependent on getting the crop in.
Your housing, your food, your health insurance, all things really come from that crop.
Absolutely. The belief in Ireland years ago was if you didn't have land, you didn't have anything. Well, you got to make the most of the land you have.
Well, this is just one part of the operation. When we think about the planting and the nurturing of the crop and then the harvesting, but as you gather it, what do you do with it?
Well, at that point, the tractor behind us is used on the grain cart, and then every load is weighed and accounted for. The grain cart has a scale on it, so that helps for our crop insurance records, as well as then we make sure that our trucks are going in legally loaded and not overloaded or underloaded. They come back to the bin site and be stored away until at such a time when the marketing opportunity presents itself. So then they're delivered to either the soybean processor or the corn processor.
So Jim, you've talked a lot about harvesting that crop and then also gathering it and bringing it in. What happens after you bring in, for example, the corn to the bin site?
Okay, so the trucks will roll in and unload the corn in the wet holding capacity. We try to hold about a day's worth of combining in our wet holding, and then it goes through the dryer to remove the excess moisture, get it down to about 14.5% moisture for storage. And that's a lengthy process, but with technology and their upgrades of our equipment, it's gotten significantly easier. Example, on our cell phones, we can pull up an app and we can tell all the functions of that grain dryer, the performance and what's going on in that. So even if you're 300 miles away, like Patrick was last year, he could still look at his phone and tell what the dryer was what it was doing.
So you don't spend as much time in the grain dryer shack as you used to?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's streamlined the process significantly.
So it also means you can be out in the field harvesting and working while you're drying.
Yeah, absolutely. I can be combining, and at the same time, even though Patrick is running the trucks and dumping and running the dryer during the fall, I can also know what's going on with the dryer right from the combine seat.
So why do you need to get it down to 14.5% or less?
Well, if you have excess moisture, then you'll start to get a molding situation, and you just need to push that below. Number 2 yellow corn is at 15% or under, so we want to get it down there to just be under that, because there can be a little moisture rebound, and through aeration and whatnot, you can have that, and we just want to make sure the quality is good.
Number 2 yellow corn based on USDA standards, so you're selling into a market that expects a certain minimum of quality, right?
Absolutely.
And of
Yes.
course, exports are so important for our markets. What happens if we don't deliver a quality product?
Well, the biggest comparison is that customer will then be dissatisfied with the product that they're producing, and they'll look elsewhere.
So Jim, we talked a little bit about how important it is to have quality product to export, but how about for our home use in Minnesota, in the United States, for like biofuels or for feeding livestock?
Yeah, so the quality is everything, and with biofuels, you have a higher test weight and you have a higher yield of ethanol per bushel of corn on the better quality, and also on the feed quality, you have better performance on the pigs. So it's important to have that top quality.
Well, now you're multitasking again. You're exporting product, you're fueling our vehicles, and you're providing us protein from livestock. Wow.
Yeah, the world lives on protein, right?
With all that talk about quality and storage, there must also be a component of marketing. Who does that?
Well, that's done by yours truly. I guess I have the investment in the crop, and so I guess I get to make the mistakes of marketing. And this last year has been a real challenge for marketing our crop, and there have been some opportunities to get some sales made, but probably not enough sales.
What happens to the farm and to your family living if a successful marketing of the product doesn't happen?
Well, an example of a 20-cent move in soybeans at 50 bushel yield will, change our income by $10 an acre. So a 20-cent move can basically cost us about $1,800 just in the blink of an eye.
And it sometimes moves a lot more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Our markets have changed significantly over this last year. Granted, there's some things that need to probably be realigned with some trade agreements and that, but it does affect us on the farm.
So, do you have a checklist that everybody goes through getting ready for harvest, or does everybody know what to do?
There's a mental checklist, but then there's also a mechanical checklist that we want to make sure that everything is documented, what has been done. So when we go to the field, we know that this has been done.
Well, Jim, not only do you have the annual pressure or the annual opportunity of growing and harvesting and marketing a crop, you shared with me that your farm has been around for a little while. So do you think maybe legacy and continuing the farm is part of your pressures?
I really don't view it as pressure. However, I don't necessarily want to break that chain of succession. It's 160 years
Wow.
this year in Minnesota for the farming end of it. And I don't want to be the generation that messes that up.
Well, it looks like you're doing a good job of keeping it going. Tell us about the family members that are helping you do that.
So virtually, our farm is totally a family driven. Our son Patrick is in charge of the day-to-day operations and making those decisions. We work very closely together, and that's something I'm very proud of. And my wife Kelly is taking care of the books and the details and whatnot that I sometimes aren't the best at. Our daughter Katie is also working in that capacity. Our son-in-law Sam is looking after some of the hog barns and that. And then we also have some, our daughter Megan is working off the farm, but she will bring meals and lunches, and she'll lift our spirits at times if we're kind of down in the dumps. But and then we have some other employees that work with us, and their families are just as important, and they're part of our family. We're all working as a team.
Jim, thanks for showing us what's happening inside of your farm shop and also getting ready for fall harvest. This is an important time for you, and I wish you a great harvest.
Well, I appreciate that, Dan, and as long as the weather cooperates from here on out, we'll be in good shape.
Sounds excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Hi, this is Kent Thiesse. Sonny Perdue, the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, indicated that the new USDA Market Facilitation Program, or MFP, that is being paid to farmers of certain commodities to offset losses from the trade agreements and tariffs with China, Mexico, and other countries will certainly help the financial situation. But he's also went on to say that those payments will not make farmers financially whole again. Many farm operators entered the 2018 year with projected profit levels barely at a break-even level for crop and livestock production at the projected prices. As the year has went on and prices for crops and livestock have declined, together with the ongoing weather issues in many areas with reduced crop yields, that financial situation and financial losses have certainly been accentuated. Local fall crop prices in the fall of 2018 were about 50 cents per bushel lower for corn and $2 per bushel lower for soybeans than the planting prices that were used for cash flow purposes by farm operators and ag lenders at the beginning of the year. The MFP payment of $1.65 per bushel for soybeans certainly helps make up for some of that loss. However, for farmers with reduced yields, they're probably going to show a loss for the year, and even farmers that had average or above average yields will probably only show a very small profit. In the case of corn, the MFP payment was only 1 cent per bushel, which certainly did not make up for the lost income from reduced corn prices during the 2018 year. Farmers that had average or below average yields will probably show a pretty significant loss on corn production in 2018, and even the farmers fortunate enough to have well above average yields will probably just barely break even. Farmers that had reduced yields in 2018 could also collect some crop insurance indemnity payments. However, to collect those payments, they probably needed to carry 80 or 85% revenue protection coverage, and also will need at least a 10 to 15% loss of production at current prices. And an even bigger issue for farm operators might be what happens in 2019 if the trade war continues and we continue to have low commodity prices. This could result in some very difficult times for farmers as they work with their ag lenders on their 2019 lines of credit. This has been Kent Thiesse, and we'll be back next time.
We're on site at Clarks Grove, Minnesota at the Kiter Seed Day, and along with me is Brad Carlson from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Brad. Well, as an extension educator, you see and do a lot of things. What's your specialty?
Well, I'm a soil scientist. I work out of our regional office in Mankato, but I cover the entire state, and I work on issues primarily related to water quality. So I think everybody's familiar with the fact that there's a lot of issues particularly related to nitrogen the last few years. And so I do a lot of that, and I work with farmers on trying to be proactive on water quality and environmental issues.
Well, your research is designed to help farmers and others keep the environment safe and grow a profitable crop. What are you finding in this research?
Yeah, so we're working extensively with both groundwater and surface water issues. So that's our two parts here. We've got particularly sensitive parts of the state where we've got sandy soils in central Minnesota, and then the karst areas in southeast Minnesota, and then some sporadic parts in western Minnesota also where we've got sandy soils where we worry about nitrate moving into groundwater. And then beyond that, we've got issues with surface water, and that's as it's moving down into the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. These issues they're kind of two separate issues, and then on the other hand, they're the same because we're both dealing with nitrogen and nitrate movement. And so the question becomes, because nitrogen is part of the environment, how much of that is natural, how much of that's avoidable, and then what can we do about it? And so we're kind of guided by the federal Gulf Hypoxia Action Plan, as well as our state Clean Water Protection Act from the early 1990s, and then the Gulf Hypoxia Action Plan resulted in a nutrient reduction strategy for Minnesota. And so these two documents end up guiding or setting some standards or goals for how much nitrate we can accept in groundwater and in surface water. And so we're working with farmers to manage nitrogen, which is our single largest fertilizer input for our corn crop, and therefore our single largest fertilizer input for our crops overall in Minnesota. Making sure that farmers are putting on the correct amount of nitrogen but not over applying, because if you don't apply at least enough, that puts you in financial peril. We won't get yields that are able to sustain the farm long term and financially. And of course, if we over apply, anything the crop doesn't use is just left behind in the soil, as I already outlined. Then it can end up flushing through the soil and ending up in the water. And so we really are keying in on how fertilizer is managed, because nitrogen is a natural part of the environment. That's only a portion of the whole nitrogen budget for the environment. But it, of course, is the one we can control most easily because it is a purchased input that is applied by farmers on the landscape. And so I've been working extensively with farmers the last few years on understanding best management practices, university research regarding nitrogen applications for the purpose of applying the correct amount of nitrogen for profitability, as well as the correct amount to avoid it moving into the environment.
Well, Brad, with new variable rate equipment, better research and diagnostic equipment, you must have come to some conclusions that maybe we didn't have even a few years ago.
One of the things that we talked about today at this field day was variable rate nitrogen technologies, and that's been really fascinating because it's really moving the cutting edge on our ability to prescribe the exact amount of nitrogen that the corn crop needs and then apply it at the correct timing. And so we've been focusing on that extensively. There's a number of different technologies related to that, ranging from sensing or using drones to information-based, such as taking a soil sample during the growing season, to crop models, which actually look like they probably offer some of our greatest hope. They model the growth of the crop using weather data, and therefore project how much nitrogen the crop needs at that point, as well as modeling how much nitrogen is still available in the soil profile based on fertilizer inputs, based on how much is mineralized from natural sources in the soil, which is our organic matter, as well as how much might have been lost because the soil has been saturated or we've had adverse weather conditions. So these variable rate technologies look at making variable recommendations across the landscape. And so what we've discovered with that technology is a couple things. First of all, our University of Minnesota recommendations, we've always kind of billed those as being, I should say, spot on. I realize that there's never such a thing as spot on in environmental situations, but in terms of they encompass most circumstances, and using the variable rate technologies, which look at coming at a nitrogen recommendation in a different way, they're pretty well validating it, and in a lot of cases they're telling us we don't need to even put as much on. And so we're discovering that the reasons why you might need more nitrogen are primarily related to loss, particularly in a wet or cold growing season. And so the extent to which these technologies are able to account for that during the season and allow us to manage it will also allow us to more precisely apply nitrogen to make sure there's nothing left over at the end of the year that could then be lost into the water.
Brad, great information. As I watch and work with farmers over the years, it looks like they are always wanted information, but it seems like there's a quest more now than ever. Good solid data that's verifiable and repeated often enough to really count on it. Is that true?
Well, society in general, I think we've really been in awe of what technology has done in the last 10, 15 years, you know. Unless you're you know, like my teenage sons who never knew the world before all of this stuff. But I think a lot of us have seen the evolution of our smartphone technologies and so forth, and really been impressed with the things that can be done, and farmers are no different. They look at this evolution of technology and they say, well, clearly this is also going to benefit me. There's got to be applications in agriculture, and so that is the case. And so, yeah, I think farmers are really engaging in this because I think they've seen all the other places that technologies improved their lives and improved the environment, improved the world, and I think they realize it's got the potential to do the same for their operations.
Brad, thanks for the useful information and sharing with us today. Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
It's not an easy time for the ethanol industry right now, with little if any profits and an excess of supply. Randy Doyle is the manager of the Alcorn Ethanol Facility in Claremont, Minnesota, and past chairman of the Renewable Fuels Association. Doyle says there are several reasons for the downturn, but waivers for oil refineries has been one of the biggest culprits in the low price situation.
We've got lots of ethanol production, more than we can consume. We're like farmers, we can overproduce as well, but we've also had some of our demand taken away, you know, through EPA giving away those handouts to the oil refiners where they don't have to have the RINs, and that's created a big backlog of demand. So that's driving the prices down as well.
Doyle says that year-round E15 would be a big boost for the ethanol industry. Why hasn't it happened? He says that's a tough one to answer.
There's no reason not to. It's a better fuel. You have less of the components in gasoline that are nasty and poisonous. It's a slightly higher octane number. It's a better fuel.
The ethanol plant manager says ethanol is an important product for farmers and consumers alike, and something that's been very good for the country.
You know, we're already supplying a little over 10% of our gasoline supply. It's a big deal, and we have the ability to supply even more if we're given the opportunity.
The ethanol industry has been very good for not only farmers, but for the environment and consumers in general. It's an industry that has grown in the United States and one that needs to be a part of our future, like this plant here in Claremont, Minnesota. This is Lynn Kettleson reporting.
The years go by, each one quicker than the last, and it's important that as we work to provide for our communities and ourselves, we ensure that the next generation is preparing to maintain the same values and traditions that got us to where we are today. I'm Dan Hoffman. Thank you for joining us today on Farm Connections.